Okay, when we think about workers' compensation, there's a tremendous amount of content involved, and it's many of you that have gone out there, and many of you work part-time. You may not qualify for these benefits, but if you do get injured in a job where you're working full-time and you have benefits, workers' compensation is a way of giving you money based on the injury that you've had until you get better and you can go back to work. Some people are permanently out of work as a result of their injuries, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is sort of a safety net, if you will, for people who do get injured on the job. So it was developed to allow employees to be compensated without need for litigation. That was probably the biggest thing right there, because so many people were going forward and suing. And if you remember, General Motors and in Village, right, in terms of the idea with the batteries and taking on, you know, this big giant and saying that I have a back injury as a result of putting batteries in this car all day long, and up until the mid 1980s, you know, this idea of wear and tear wasn't a concept that was even allowed for workers' comp, right? It was just like we're allowed to wear you out, and once you're worn out, we're going to bring in someone else, replace you, and keep on going. And it said no, musculoskeletal injuries, especially when it relates to wear and tear, are compensable. So that was a game changer, and so part of this now ties in with that talk, and it's a chapter in our book under legal aspects of ergonomics, so you want to review that again. So it has 4 main objectives. It says replacement of income. It doesn't say full replacement of income, right? It's only partial replacement of income, so it's not 100%. There's some rehab involved. Keep in mind that rehab is limited, so it's not like an open-ended thing. It's very much like CAPS here, right? If you go in for you know, some evaluations, you know, you're under stress or something like that, there is a limit to how many times you can go to CAPS and get that. The same thing in workers' comp in terms of rehab. You can only go there so many times, and say once you've gone up to that limit, that's it. Then there's obviously the accident prevention. The idea is that how do we prevent this from happening again? Cost allocation is another one in terms of how much gets paid out. And so cost allocation kind of goes back to replacement of income, and also it ties in to this idea of rehab, because they are not equal in terms of income versus workers' comp. They are not. Early workers' compensation. Prior to these laws, employees' only recourse was through the courts, and they were pretty much putting themselves at the mercy of the courts and laws, and they tended to favor the employers. Why? Because the attorneys tended to be, you know, a lot of resources there to support them and to move forward. I see a question. What's not equal is the compensation that you get. So let's say I'm paying you $100 a day for your work, and you get injured. Your workers' comp is not going to be $100 a day. It might be $70, it might be $60, whatever is viewed as usual and customary in terms of that compensation. The other is the rehab. The rehab is limited, it's not unlimited. I was just thinking of a story of my sister works for a large appliance company. She's a systems manager for them, and she fell and broke her clavicle and ruptured the bursa in her shoulder. And as you know, the shoulder injuries are pretty complex, right? And so she was allowed, I think, something like 15 visits to a physical therapist following her surgery, which was great. Okay, 15 visits. The problem is they botched her surgery. It didn't go well at all. So they had to go in, cut her again, and reset her shoulder and everything. But because she had all this rehab that was done, the 15 times, she couldn't go back for any more rehab because she already set her limit there, and they couldn't reset it. The good news is the hospital admitted they made a mistake. The bad news is the insurance company is going to carry her for the rehab said, we're not going to reset your physical therapy, you're on your own. So that's where the difference is right there. It's not all things are equal. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. All right. Yeah. So those that didn't hear the question, it's related to workers' comp in terms of what companies allow versus, like for example, if you get injured at home versus injured on the job, and what the policies entail and so on, and the fact that there was a tremendous amount of paperwork to be filled out, and then there's a time lag between the paperwork being filled out and the time that you can be seen by a doctor and so on and so forth. That's all part of a scheme that's to me, a system that as time goes on, sort of discourages workers from filing claims and so on, because one, a lot of times they don't have the wherewithal to be able to file these claims because they didn't go out and deliberately get themselves hurt. And so now they're at home trying to recoup, and so, oh, by the way, you've got to fill out all these forms. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, they might be on drugs and other things in terms of painkillers, et cetera. And what happens eventually as this thing goes on, drags on, it creates a lot of other problems. And sometimes the employees get let go because they haven't followed procedures, so on and so forth. In most cases, things are handled in an ethical way. A lot of times, though, things border on being unethical in terms of what the companies do, the gamesmanship, especially with the workers' comp, and the employee getting compensated, for that injury. And it's a tough business out there. You don't know it until you get in the thick of it, and you're a victim of that process. So it's a fair question. And it varies by individual, but there is a trend with some companies to really make things very, very hard for someone to file for workers' comp and get full compensation for it. And then the other part of it is that time lapse between the income and the time that workers' comp money starts coming in, right, in terms of paying the bills. Meanwhile, you're leveraging credit cards and all kinds of other things, right, to keep going. So it's not a fun part of the equation to be on, not at all. So. But the other side of it is that before that, you didn't have anything unless it was litigated, and then you'd have to wait until the settlement was there. And in most instances, the attorneys would walk away with almost, the majority of the settlement. If you got $1 million, you might be lucky if you walked away with $200,000. Why? Because the rest was covered in court costs and attorney's fees. So not like, it's a better system than what was, but it's not the best. It could be improved. Good question. Thanks for asking that. So Early's workers' comp laws were ruled unconstitutional, and then there was debate in 1917. Way back, the Supreme Court ruled that workers' comp laws were acceptable, and from that point on, then workers' comp has been in play even to today. Of course, the purpose of the calls, all 50 states have comp laws, but they vary considerably. They provide benefits, they pay medical costs, provide rehab when necessary. They decrease litigation, of course. That's the whole idea is for this, is get rid of that. Encourage accident prevention, and say, well, who's eligible for workers' comp? You can go to this site in Indiana right here and find out exactly what's going on here. And as mentioned, each state varies in terms of workers' comp costs. Some are more liberal than others. Some are very strict. Indiana is about in the middle, I think the lower half to middle in terms of workers' comp and benefits. States like Wisconsin and Minnesota tend to be quite good and that into the equation. So it really depends upon the state and what the state is willing to pay into this in terms of what the compensation is. So types of insurance, there are several types. One is the compensation insurance that come up. This comes from state funds. There are private insurers. Those are self-insured. And most of these are paid in usually this way here. There's a compensation insurance that's paid in, and this is by actuarial. So the idea is you project how much you're going to pay based on the experience that occurred over the last 3 years. That's usually what they do, is they do trends like that. Methods, there are 6 methods for here. Scheduled ratings, manual ratings, expense ratings, retrospective, premium, and a combination of these. So scheduled rating is basically, okay, this is how much we're going to schedule in for the year in terms of workers' comp cost. A manual rating is that this is how much it costs, this is how much you're going to pay. The experience rating is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, is that what you've been experiencing over the last a couple of years in this area. And of course the idea is that you sort of look at overall rather than a big one. Remember I talked about 50% of cost is like the last 2% of all the injuries that occur. Then there's a retrospective rating. This is your actuarials that I talked about. And then there's a premium discounting. And this is for programs that are proactive and so on and say, listen, we're doing all these things in terms of education, training our workers. Here's our accident rating scores and so on, and how we compare with the industry. And so they can offer, some companies offer discounts. For example, State Farm and Liberty Mutual are known for that, especially Liberty Mutual getting in the occupational side of things. Or there's a combination of these above. Workers' comp applies when an injury can be categorized as arising out of employment or occurring in the course of employment. Arising out or in the course of. The definition of employee can vary from state to state. However, a key concept in distinguishing between an employee and an independent contractor is the direction, or the direction of supervision. Employees are provided direction by the employer. Contractors are not. So, for example, I've known a number of situations with various companies around here, down in Indianapolis, that will hire in contractors to build their buildings and to do demolition work and whatnot. And often the better companies will look at what the record has been for that particular contractor in terms of coming in what their injury rates are and so on and so forth. And based upon that all things being equal, then they will get the bid in terms of coming in and doing the work. Why? Because that company doesn't want to have any a black eye, if you will, of someone getting hurt while performing a job on that company's property. That happens quite a bit. So it's something to keep in mind when they look at the difference between those that are contracted in versus the employee. So let's pick one. Let's say, I'm just off the top of my head randomly, Alcoa. So let's say Alcoa is redoing its parking lot. In fact, I saw them doing this, resurfacing their parking lot a few months ago. And let's say somehow there's an incident occurs in the process of laying down the asphalt where a contractor gets injured, but it's on Alcoa's property. Who's responsible for that? The contractor is. But it gives Alcoa a black eye because the person got injured on their property and it made the news. This person got severely injured or whatever on Alcoa's property, and people remember, oh, okay, Alcoa had an incident right here. Said, no, we contracted in and they had a good reputation and the person got injured. So companies try to avoid all that. So the difference is in terms of compensation, Alcoa is not going to pay that compensation. The contractor is going to pay out that compensation based on that injury. So that's a difference. So injuries are compensable through workers' comp. They fall into 4 categories. I'm going to hold you responsible for this, so definitely take your pens out and note these 4. There's temporary partial, temporary total, permanent partial, and permanent total. So intuitively, what do you think is be the most costly? This one right here, right? You're out, right? Permanent total disability. So the person can no longer work, so now they have to have compensation, really pretty much the rest of their life, right up until they reach the age of 65. Or if they're severely injured and have other issues, then Medicaid can also kick in and help offset some of those costs. But as you can see, we have temporary partial disability. This would be, let's say, someone who suffers a burn, for example, on the job, and they're out for a while, or they hurt their back, or they strain their shoulder, or they break a leg, something of that nature. So that's temporary partial. Okay, they're out for a while. Then there's temporary total. Anybody have any ideas about what temporary total might be in terms of an injury on the job that you're going to get some compensation for? I have it. I don't get compensated for it. I have a hearing loss, right, because of my time in the military. I have a permanent hearing loss. It's service-connected. So if you're working for a company and you lose your hearing as a result of that, they've done an audiometry test on you, and they have your baseline, and they show that you now have a hearing loss, a segmented hearing loss, as a result of working in that particular company. And I mean, they'll do all kinds of things like, well, did you have earbuds for listening to music and all kinds of things like that? And they said, no, there's my baseline audiogram. This is what I've been doing. This is what your noise levels are in a facility. No hearing protection was provided, so on and so forth. Therefore, you're entitled to some compensation as a result of temporary total. Temporary total in this sense would be let me just back up a second. Temporary total would be like a back injury that you're out for 30 days, or you break a leg, you're out for 60 days. The one I'm just talking about with the hearing, I'm sorry about that, I got ahead of myself, is permanent partial. Permanent partial. So that's like the hearing loss. I'm sorry about that, I jumped ahead of myself. So that's a permanent partial. The temporary total would be the person is just incapable of doing anything as a result of their injury, but they do get better and they come back. In this case here, like my sister that I brought up a little bit earlier with the shoulder injury, she's been out from work, and then she went back, and now she's fully back at work, but she was limited on the physical therapy. Then the permanent total disability is something where someone is just injured permanently and they no longer can function and perform on that particular job. They're just out. And this can be anything ranging from usually I've seen this for people who suffer back injuries a second time. So they hurt themselves. I've seen this with like truck drivers and so on. And what happened is they injured themselves again a second time, and now they're under a lifting limit. They can't lift more than 25 pounds or something of that nature. And the result of that means they no longer can perform their job in that business or in that industry. So that's your permanent total. Are we okay on those four things? Because you're going to see them again. We good on each example? Okay. Permanent partial. The approaches to handling is the whole person theory, the wage loss theory, the loss of wage earning capacity theory. And what's interesting about this is that, okay, we lost the whole person. Well, you figured it on wages. That's where that comes from in terms of the whole person. Like what was that person capable of doing? And I'll distinguish it from the wage loss theory in a second. But what that person was capable of doing in total versus something that's partial. So the whole person would be, well, you can still work in the company, but you can answer the phone now rather than doing manual labor. Okay, so that's where that comes from. The wage loss theory is that actually it's not only in terms of what you're making right now, but what your potential is down the road. So in this case, your wage loss would be, okay, you're given this much compensation, and you're allowed it for so many months, and since you're going to be out for 6 months or so, the amount of wage loss is going to be based on this, and this is what you're going to be compensed for. And then finally, your loss of wage earning capacity theory is the one that probably has the greatest impact, and this is on your trajectory for earnings. So you imagine if you're on let's say you're all going out and you're professionals, and let's say you hurt yourself in the practice of what you do. Let's say your earning potential over a lifetime, I'm just going to bring up this number, let's say $2.5 million. Let's say that's what you're going to be making over a lifetime. And you hurt yourself at about that point where you've made about, let's say, $500,000. Let's say you're a physician or you're professional hygienist or whatever, and you're a real good one, hygienist, and you're making that kind of money, and you hurt yourself and you say, this is where I would be 30 years from now in terms of that income, and I got clipped right here at $500,000. And if you look at the trajectory of my profession, at the end, all things being equal, would be about $2.5 million. So the idea is that how are we going to compensate you now, especially if we get a permanent total, right? What we're talking about is how are we going to compensate you now between what you had made and what your potential was for making in terms of the end of your career. That makes sense to everybody? So that's the biggie right there, is that, wow, you know, I can no longer go out and do what I wanted to do in life, even though I was professionally trained for it. And as a result of that, that compensation should be somewhere around that upper end. It's interesting how that plays out. And usually you bring in the attorneys to sort of litigate that. To say, you know, I could have been there, but instead I'm not. So this loss of wage earning capacity, usually what you see are these folks that come in and are making some pretty big bucks and saying, this is what I could have made, this is what I've made so far, and try to settle the difference. Accrued benefits, workers' comp accrue in families and dependents of workers who are fatally injured. So there is compensation for that. In fact, this kind of made the news a little bit. It's a little outside the realm of it, but it certainly is something that you probably heard on the news with survivor benefits and so on, that some of our soldiers being killed over in Afghanistan, right, and not coming back, ambushes and so on. And during the federal shutdown, that this was also impacted, where those families were denied any of the survival benefits until the shutdown was finally brought to pass. But it was, to me, that was horrible that stood out. But this is something that has to move forward and does so. And I mentioned earlier about the FACE investigations that NIOSH does. These are the fatal accidents that occur in which you interview the next of kin and so on and find out what happened. What happens is that they get benefits if the person involved is killed on the job. Remaining spouse receives benefits for life or until they get remarried. Dependents typically receive benefits until they reach legal age of maturity, and that's usually the age of 18. All workers' compensation laws provide for payment of medical expenses within a specified time period. Keep that in mind. Everything's time limited. And there are differences on how a physician may be selected. There are options out there. Employee selects a physician of choice. That doesn't happen too much anymore. Employee selects a physician from a list provided by the state agency. That's usually the usual and customary. Employee selects from a physician from a list provided by the employer. That happens, usually these are larger companies, mega companies like the SIAs and the Caterpillars, the Alcoas, and so on. Employer selects a physician, but the selection may be changed by the state agency. That's an override that occurs here. I don't believe, I can't tell you for a fact that happens in Indiana. I believe that once the employer selects a physician, if that option is available, then the state doesn't overturn that. But if it's a smaller employer, then the state may have that leverage. And then the employer selects a physician, but after a specified period of time, the employee may choose another. This is much more rare that I've seen in terms of choosing a physician based upon what the employee deems appropriate. Injuries defined. The definition of a serious injury can vary from state to state. As a rule, though, an injury is serious if it requires over 24 hours of active medical treatment. This does not include passive treatment such as observation. In other words, a person goes in, has surgery, is kept in the hospital or kept overnight, and medical treatment is prescribed over that period of time. So keep that one in mind. That's an important one. Settling uncontested and contested claims. Workers' comp claims can be settled in one of three ways. The first two are uncontested. The third is for contested claims, and these approaches are direct settlement. How much money we're going to settle with you. A lot of times this occurs with older workers. Let's say you're the age of 60 and you're planning to retire at 65 and go on Medicare and those benefits. They say, well, okay, what we'll do is that since you're 60, what we'll do is we'll just settle with you directly, and so we'll give you X amount of money. If you agree to that, then you're done, right? And you move on. There's an agreed settlement. which basically says, okay, we're going to give you this amount of money. Then you go back to them and say, no, I don't think that's right. According to my trajectory, I should be getting more. So it goes back and forth, and finally you settle on an amount. Then there's a public hearing. So this gets involved, and so now it's contested. The employer doesn't come to an agreement with the employee, and vice versa. And so then you have a public hearing, and the public hearing decides how much you're going to get. A lot of times those are pretty lucrative, by the way. You see sometimes these can go into the millions if it's egregious. Goes of medical management, workplace injuries. We want to speed up the processing of claims, reduce the cost, of course, reduce fraud and abuse. There's a lot of that going on. I can tell you, based on a number of experiences where someone will put in a claim, let's say a back injury, which happens to be one of the more common ones. The company will hire a private investigator in some instances and basically sit out there and sit and watch the person and see if they do anything in terms of manual labor. So they're claiming they can't, their back hurts so much they can't do their job anymore, yet they jump on a Harley and go flying out the gate or something of that nature. Or they see him back in the garage, being a backyard mechanic and moving things around. All they need to do is document that, and that whole thing, that claim is thrown out. So this is one of the things that they do is find, some of the people who are trying to take the system for a ride, and then ways in which some of the employers are trying to say, we don't think it's that person's really taking this, and we don't believe it's real. And in many instances, it is real. In some instances, it can be fraud and abuse. But keep in mind, there are PIs out there doing this kind of work to find out if the person legitimately does have an injury or not. Then there's improved medical management in terms of getting better. Cost allocation, a process of attempting to spread the cost of workers' comp across the industry so that no individual company is overburdened. And that's really the key concept right here, right, for workers' comp. The cost of workers' comp includes the cost of premiums, benefits, and administration. So the idea is to level the playing field a little bit so that if someone does, have, someone that gets seriously injured and it's a couple $100,000 for back surgery, that this is now spread out over many employees, many employers, to which those claims can be paid. Problems experienced with workers' comp. Workers' comp is not achieving its intended objectives. Again, they're trying to speed things up. They're trying to keep litigation out, so on and so forth. There's a lot of back and forth going on. So in spite of itself, there are some challenges out there. One of the students in class raised that point a little bit earlier. It has not succeeded in taking litigation out of the process. So litigations can still come into play. I don't think you can go down a highway today anywhere. I'm all over. I'm in, last couple of weeks I'm in Florida, I'm in North Carolina, I'm in New York, I'm in New Jersey, I'm out west, and I'm driving down, and you can't go by a sign that says, are you hurt on the job? Call me. 1-800, we're going to get them. That kind of thing. And it's like, it's out there, and people see that and they say, maybe I'll give this person a call. In fact, you'll probably see it on television quite a bit as well. The cost of a system is raising steadily, but the benefits to injured workers have decreased in real terms. In other words, what the workers' comp costs being paid out are not keeping pace with inflation and cost of living. And there is evidence of abuse on both sides. Not just the employees, but also the employers in terms of using the system. Therefore, the future workers' comp can be summarized in one word, and this is not me. This is from the book. And the authors in this context says that, there needs to be workers' comp reform out there. And I have to say, certainly there are a lot of adjustments that have to take place. And it's been out. Workers' comp has been out, as you saw, the turn of last century. Been around a long time. It's been fine-tuned, but it still needs to be adjusted, especially for you. You're seeing all this stuff that's happening in terms of the Obamacare issues, in terms of logging on, so on and so forth. I am very embarrassed, about something like this. I mean, they should have turned to you to begin with to get the platforms out there and the right stuff, because you're the ones that are actually going to make it work. And I think before this whole thing rolls out, Even though you benefited from the insurance side of the equation, that being at 26 and still being able to have your health insurance coverage, this whole debacle ties into this where it's going to impact on you in the long run. So it's something where your voice needs to be heard, but I also the solutions are going to come from you. There's no question in my mind that you'll be able to turn this thing around and make it work. So reform here, probably going to be reform in some of the laws being passed today. Cost reduction strategies in terms of staying in touch with injured employees, determining causes is important, and this is just follow-up. Is what they're saying is that what caused it and what can we do to prevent it. Investigating and reporting. Difference between reports and accident analysis is looking at the why in terms of being completed by a professional. Investigations to identify those causal factors. And then it's important as soon as possible after the accident or incident occurs that the evidence and the memories are still fresh because recall bias can come in one way or the other depending on the accident. The facts to be uncovered, an accident investigation can be summarized as the who did it, what happened, when did it happen, where, and how. So making sure that we cover all these elements in the questions. Common causes are the four categories. There's personal beliefs and feelings in terms of common causes, decision to work unsafely, a mismatch or overload, and a systems failure. Based on all the things that you've heard from me in this class, where do you think I fall in this equation? The first two or the last two? The last two. I definitely feel that people are not inherently going to hurt themselves. They may make some poor decisions, but those poor decisions are not premeditated to get yourself hurt or to hurt other people. So I believe more often than not, when they talk about human error in something, that human error hasn't been fully evaluated to take a much closer look at how the job was designed and what the outcome from that resulted in, and then also a systems failure. There was something that occurred, and if you remember the different theories, right, in terms of parallel versus serial processing for accidents, the domino theory versus the energy transfer and so on and so forth. I believe that these things play a much greater role, but it's much easier to go after these things because you're basically looking at the individual rather than what bigger picture lies here. Then there are traps that come out in unsafe conditions, unsafe acts. And these last ones right here is just basically, this to me falls under a situation of system. Unsafe conditions also falls under system. And unsafe acts, this is, again, human error. That comes up basically, you did something that was unsafe. And again, I don't believe humans inherently do such things to which they purposely know that they may get injured or injure somebody else. So that's my own side of the equation on this, and I think is consistent with the philosophy of this course. Conducting an accident investigation, we're going to do these as follows. Record all the evidence, photograph or videotape the accident scene, identify the witnesses, interview the witnesses, and in this process right here, this is very much like your projects that you're going to be looking at. Think about this. Instead of just looking at an accident, look at your particular project, and you're going to record that information, right? You get what you can from the internet in terms of your research and from the library, but you're going to record all that information, and then you're going to photograph it. So you're going to have your pictures and your video. Then you're going to identify, who these people are. So you have people give testimony, and then you interview them and have them give you some feedback. So the idea is that you're collecting all your information, and of course, timing is critical. Here's an accident investigation. This is OSHA, looking at thousands of accidents occur throughout. And so you can actually get up and take a look, this fat cat, of all these different investigations that occur, and you can look at relationships to the standards, conducting an investigation, the various safety programs are out there. Here's some statistics that you can look at, and then there are additional information and references to go to. Categories of witnesses, two categories. One is what they saw, right, versus secondary, were present at the scene but not see it. In other words, this is secondary. So which one are you going to go with, the first one or the second one? Most instances you're going to go with the eyes on target, right? What they saw, directly versus what they heard, right, from somebody else. And there's tertiary. They weren't present, but they have information that may be relevant. This may be something where people are building up cases, and we're going to talk a little bit later on in the course about terrorism and violence and so on in the workplace. But a lot of this stuff now is information that's gathered from the internet, emails, texting, and so on. Interviews should take place at the site. When it isn't practical, they should be in a neutral location. Getting the facts. Keys are putting the witness at ease, asking open-ended questions, listening carefully to what they're saying, interrupt only if necessary, if they're just off on a tangent about something. Eyewitnesses, when possible, do not let them perform the task that led up to the accident. The idea is a simulation right there, just describe what happened. And the reports then should say the findings, what you found, the causes, and causes of that. This is the idea where you want to get to prevention. Recommendations for corrective action. And then there are report forms that meet record-keeping standards for OSHA. And what's the form that's used most commonly now? 100, 200, or 300? The 300, right? That'll be a quiz or a test question, so know that. These OSHA forms that get filled out in terms of injuries and illnesses. Okay. It's kind of that's not my picture, but I thought it was pretty clever. Having a little safety helmet on that little mouse.